Welcome to a horror in detail. Are you ready to embark on a chilling journey into the realms of darkness? The mysterious and the bone-chilling world of horror stories. On this channel, we are dedicated to unraveling the most terrifying tales that will send shivers down your spine. First story. This story was shared by you/I the Meta. I'm still mentally recovering from this encounter. A little background before I unravel this horror story that is unfortunately true. First, I am a police officer for the city I live in. I am including this detail because it plays a small part later in the story. Second, this happened last month, July 2016, so I am pretty sure I will remember the details pretty accurately, not to mention that I practice depicting details of incidents every day multiple times on paper 5 days a week. Anyway, I like to go fishing. Either for bluegill or catfish for the most part. I like these two particular types of fish because they will feed at almost any time in the day, whether it's late or early in a 24-hour period. I tend to go late at night only because my sleeping schedule is set that way due to the hours I am on duty. And on my days off I have to do all of my running around and errands in the daytime. The spot I usually fish is about 12 miles out of the city and is a pretty little drive past some fields and 1 or 2 houses. After that it's just a road and trees all along the side, stretched over it kind of like a tunnel. About 6 miles down the road you have to take a sharp right. On the corner there was a man walking along the road. 6 feet 0 inches, dark hair, black shirt, tan pants. Looked like a straight guy, no tears or dirty marks on his pants. I didn't stop because I figured he was a field irrigator or he had something to do with working out there. They do all kinds of irrigation for fields at night. 20 minutes pass and I am already on the fishing dock in my chair listening to the cutting silence. No wind, no anything. I prefer it that way anyway, mostly because I have become a little paranoid being out at night all the time. You see some crazy stuff in the city at night when you are a police officer. It's very silent, the kind where you can hear the humming sound of the silence if you know what I mean. But then there was a crack, as if someone was walking up. I turned around and flicked on my headlamp. I was clam at this point. I figured it might be a rabbit or maybe a small owl. To my surprise, it was the guy I had seen earlier. He seemed blank. He just looked at me and I looked at him. Hey there. Beautiful night, isn't it? Trying not to sound like a complete moron, stranger. Yes. He paused before he said that, almost like he couldn't speak. He had a droning to his voice like he had a speech impediment or something. His voice sounded like a fucking nail on a chalkboard. Scratchy plus the stutter before his words. It gave me the nastiest feeling. Literal chills. One word and I was afraid of him. I deal with sex offenders, domestic violence, and drug dealers daily. And this guy had me feeling this way after one word. Did you come out here to throw some line too? This time he did not answer me. He started to shake. Almost like he was about to have a seizure, except he was still staring right at me. And now he was making a straining noise with his throat. Like he was growling. Fucking growling. A human. A grown man growling at me in a truly disturbing tone 6 miles from the nearest house. Alone. My first instinct is to identify myself. I grabbed my credentials, off-duty badge, from my back pocket as I started to grab my tackle and chair. I put everything where I could pretty much pick up and go. But as I look up he is still doing it, still making that noise. Takes off headlamp and points it at credentials. City police officer, please sir keep calm and keep your hands visible to me. He would not stop, he only got louder. The thought that should be going through your head right now is exactly what was going through mine. What the fuck or what the fuck do I do now? I moved my light from the hand it was in into the hand with the credentials in it and reached for my CCW. Concealed carry weapon, call me a hothead, but honestly, what would you do? I am cornered here. He is standing right by the only walkway off the dock. Not to mention the only way to my truck. Right as I pulled it from my holster this guy lets out a screech. Not a scream. A screech. I can say that is very close to the loudest thing I have ever heard with complete certainty. I jumped, honestly it was not expected at all. I get my light and weapon back on target, or at least where he was. I could hear brush and rocks moving. It seemed as if the noise was everywhere. I'd hear it here or over there. I decided to run to the truck. I didn't pick up anything, I just ran. More noises, they are legitimately behind me at this point. I dove in the truck and got out of Dodge. That's all that happened. Maybe a little anticlimactic, but this is a true story and I am typing it on the internet. That drive back home was quite a train of thoughts. I haven't been out fishing alone since.
Second story. This story was shared by you/strange accounts. When it rains in the woods, it's raining again. To be honest with you, I'm terrified of rain. I never leave the house when it's storming outside. But to give myself some credit, I never used to be like this. I used to love watching the rain fall from outside the windows, but now I always have my curtains pulled tight across the edges of the windowsill. I wish I could show you what made me the way I am, partly to warn you, partly to verify myself. But I can't. I can only write out my story like it's some sort of fantasy, as if it's just another bizarre story on the internet that deserves to be forgotten in a week. If you see it like that, then that's fine, but I won't forget. I'll never forget. In 2012, I was a 21-year-old college student. I was absolutely madly in love with nature and all things wild. I had spent my childhood roaming up and down tree lines fantasizing about mythical creatures and fantastic monsters. Now there I was in 2012 as an adult, studying forestry with dreams of defending those tree lines and fantasies I held so dear. I was absolutely ecstatic when my professor announced an opportunity for some extra credit. He suggested that we spend a few days of our upcoming break walking along some trails and paths to remind ourselves why we were doing what we were doing. As an avid hiker, I knew of a hiking trail a few hours over from our town that offered plenty of room to walk with very little crowding. The only ones who really walked more than a few minutes down the trail were the park rangers, and the chances of seeing one of them on the ever-winding and expanding trails of the forest seemed small. "Hey Lily, want to take a trip down to the preserve with me?" I asked as the bell finished tolling, signaling the end of the school day. The girl next to me, Lily, was a quiet and sweet girl. She had long brunette hair that stretched just past her shoulders and gentle green eyes. She was the type of person who people admired from afar. Beautiful but silent. A passing joke or compliment would make her smile, but she'd very rarely comment back. To most, that'd make them move on to the next person. To me, that made me want to be closer to her. We'd been friends for a while at this point. Whether or not any sort of romantic intent was had between us, I couldn't say. We just knew we connected on some sort of level. "Yeah, of course. Just tell me when." She looked into my eyes with a soft smile on her face. I smiled back at her. I hoped this trip would turn out well. A few days passed. Lily and I spent our free time in stores gathering food, supplies, and tents together. Soon enough, we were all packed up and ready to head out. We took my small car with our bags tied down on the roof and took the highway a few hours east. By the time we got there, it was mid-afternoon. Still plenty of time to walk, but also a bad time to find parking. There was plenty of people here walking their dogs, setting up lunches, and walking the paths. "I thought you said it'd be quiet?" Lily asked with a slight snicker. I rolled my eyes in response. I'm sure these kids aren't planning on hiking a few days in. It'll get quiet, I promise. I spun around and began taking our large packs off of the roof of the vehicle. For as big as they were surprisingly easy to carry. Lily slipped the straps over her shoulders and waited for me to start heading towards the park. As we approached the trail's entrance, we saw a ranger loosely standing guard. "You guys heading in?" he asked. There was no hostility or caution in his tone. He was just merely asking a simple question. "Yeah, that's all right?" I questioned the fit middle-aged man. "Of course, just let me know your names and take my card. If you need anything, call down to the station. There's a couple ranger shacks deeper in. Feel free to use them if you need to, just make sure to clean up. The ranger gave a welcoming smile and handed me a small business card for the local ranger station. Thank you. Oh, and my name's Max. This is Lily. Lily gave a small nod at the ranger, and he nodded back respectfully. Well, Max and Lily, you enjoy yourselves out there. We'll be patrolling around, so if you see us, don't be scared to say hi. With those words, the ranger backed away from the entrance, and we began our trek. We spent half of the first day slowly walking in quiet appreciation. There's something so liberating about walking with no time limit. It's like all of the world's stress slides right off your back, and the only thing you have to worry about is yourself. In that exact moment, you're all that matters. No bills, no studies, no cares. Just avoid snakes and strange plants, and you're all set. It wasn't long into our journey before the sun began to nestle itself behind the trees in the warm, but steadily dropping temperature of the late afternoon's winds began sweeping under our sweaty clothes. Let's find a clearing to settle into, Lily said, her head tilting from one direction to the other looking for a place to set up. I nodded in approval and saw a small opening further down the path, clearly made by others who took a similar trip. It only took a few minutes to set up our tents in the clearing and to start a small fire. After all that walking and hard work, we were finally ready to be off our feet for a while. Lily plopped herself down on the opposite side of the fire I was sitting at and pulled out a granola bar to eat. I felt a rumble in my stomach and pulled out one of my own. This place is really beautiful, she said, taking a large bite out of the bar. Yeah, haven't seen many animals yet though. I unwrapped my food and placed it on my lips, ready to take a bite. I quickly glanced over at Lily and froze. In the increasingly darkening forest just off the trail, just behind Lily, was something about the size of half a football. It was cloaked in the darkness, but I assumed it had to have been some sort of small critter. I began to squint my eyes, trying to focus on it, but whatever it was seemed to fade out of existence, going straight into the ground. Everything all right? Lily asked. I realized it must have seemed like I was staring at her with food half in my mouth. I laughed and shrugged, shaking my head softly. Yeah, sorry. I thought I saw an animal or something off in the woods. It was small. Could have just been a rabbit or something. It must have burrowed into the ground, though. My friend peered over her shoulder into the silent woods and looked around. I knew she wouldn't see anything, whatever it was, left as quickly as I caught sight of it. We ended up finishing our meal, extinguishing the fire, and climbing into our separate tents. I slept like a log. All of that walking put me out like a light. It wasn't until the morning that I woke up. I stumbled out of the tent, nearly tripping on the small fabric ledge at the exit of my portable shelter. The hot and humid summer's morning sun hit me like a pile of bricks. Just so you know, I think we need to watch out for snakes, Lily said softly while I was wiping my brow. I looked over at her to see her undoing the tent supports from the forest floor. Did you see one? I asked, bending down and following suit with the camp cleanup. I think so. I heard something rubbing on the bottom of my tent last night. I opened my eyes, and the indents on my walls looked like a pretty thick snake trying to wiggle its way in. She didn't seem bothered by the potential late-night visitor, so I kept her warning in my mind but continued on. As our journey went on, we realized that every step we took there was another blotch in the sky. Somehow a storm was brewing overhead that none of the forecasts we had watched warned us of. How much longer until it rains? Lily was interrupted by a large thunderclap nearby in the clouds. I felt the earth tremor below us before a few raindrops began falling from the dimly lit sky. Thanks, Lily, I said, arching my head towards her direction. She scoffed and I laughed. The rain was little more than a small drizzle at that moment, but it was clear it was going to get worse. Let's hurry and find a place to set up. I watched as she began to increase her pace, slowly moving from a walk into a jog, heading deeper down the trail. I followed suit right next to her. For a while, it seemed like we weren't going to find a clearing anytime soon. We were already on the verge of being considered undoubtedly drenched, and to our luck, at that exact moment of thought, another strong explosion of thunder erupted from above. This time the floodgates were opened. Rain began to fall with a purpose and with enough force to erupt on impact, splashing everything nearby with the drop's watery contents. "Hey, right over there," I heard Lily yell out, just barely audible through the thunderous rain. She was running off of the main path down a small side trail nearby. I looked at where she was heading and saw a small cabin. I ran off the path with her. With each step, more and more mud thrust itself against my legs. I increased my speed, hoping to catch up to my light-footed friend, but something caught me off guard. The tip of my foot slid underneath something, and my momentum carried me downwards, face first into a mud bath. For a few seconds I was dazed, just laying down in the runny muck pit. I eventually looked down to my feet and saw what looked like a thin tree root also caked in dirt erupting out of the ground. But as my eyes kept on the root, those initial assumptions fell to the wayside. The shimmering of the mud is what made me realize that whatever this object was, it was moving just beneath the mud. Then it clicked in my head. The snakes Lily had brought up. I had just tripped over one of them. I felt a shiver cross over my back, and I jolted back up to my feet and continued on my path, abandoning that snake behind. Without another incident, I made it to the cabin doors and busted inside, finally free from the hurricane-like storm. Wow, a familiar voice rang out in the shack. I looked over to see a drenched but otherwise clean Lily staring at me with an amused smile on her face. "Decide to have a wrestling match out there?" "Haha, funny," I said, looking down at myself. Mud was dripping off of just about every pore of my body. "I think I met one of your snakes you mentioned out there. It decided to give me a little trip." "Oh, really?" Lily said as she grabbed me and turned me around, searching the pack on my back for something to help me clean up. "You were right. They're pretty thick. I wonder what kind they are. I can't imagine them being venomous being that wide." I felt the hands of my companion yanking out fabric from my pack. I took some time to look around the cabin as Lily pulled the towels free. It was wooden, old, and completely empty. There was a cooking stove off to one side, but other than that it looked very sparse. Clearly it was only meant for a quick one-night stay. "Here, get yourself cleaned up." I turned back around and Lily handed me a bundle of towels. I immediately wiped off my face and brow. The dirt was already starting to dry and stick to my skin. "Thanks," I replied to her as she began setting up her things. I put my pack down against the door and walked over to a window, still wiping myself down. I watched as the rain continued its assault on the earth, the dirt running like rivers down the valleys and trails, both natural and man-made. "It looks terrible outside," I remarked. I heard a small groan of acknowledgement come from behind me. I let my eyes trail over the forested wetland over to the path we took to get up here. My body locked up when I saw something right where I tripped. Something was protruding from the ground like a small pillar. I rubbed the inside of the window fruitlessly to clear off the fog and obstructing rain. I could barely make out what looked like a thick, partially submerged branch broken off on one end with small twigs splintering off skyward. "Hey, come and look at this." I called out to Lily, who was still fondling around with her bags. "Is it the snake?" she asked, rising to her feet. "I don't think so. It looks weird though." I watched the mud-coated object get hammered by rain as Lily approached and peered outside. "Is that a broken tree root?" she suggested. I could only shrug. Whatever it was wasn't moving. "Wait, Lily chimed in again. "Look at the color." As more and more of the rain ran its way down the object, the less obstructed by mud the object became. I narrowed my eyes, pushing past the raindrops on the window, and noticed exactly what Lily was talking about. Whatever was under that mud was a pale shade of gray. Oh my God. Lily gasped and grabbed her mouth. What is it? I turned and looked at her, my eyebrow upturned in confusion. Look at the end of it, she said, holding her breath. I turned my gaze back outward and focused in. I felt my heart drop. Fingertips. It was an arm reaching out of the ground, still as the grave. Oh my God. My voice wavered slightly. We should call the Rangers and get them out here. Where's their card? She asked, hand extended towards me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wet but legible business card. Without hesitation, Lily snatched it out of my hand and began dialing the number in. Hello, I'd like to report something on one of the trails. She paced back and forth on the squeaky cabin floors. I turned and kept my gaze on the hand. It looked petrified in place, fingers eagerly reaching towards the sky, letting the water rush over it. We're at dash, she began to stutter. We're at, I heard the voice on the other side of the phone chirp up and Lily nodded. Hey Max, can you take a step outside and tell me what number's next to the door? I peeled my eyes away from the hand. I felt an increasingly oppressive air pressing its way inside the cabin. I shook my intuition away and walked to the door. I opened it up and stepped outside. I peered towards the arm and could see it more clearly without the blurry window between us. It was hairless, smooth, and the fingernails seemed clean and trimmed. The water that gushed over it almost seemed to vanish on impact, as if it was some sort of sponge. I had to force my eyes away from it to view the number on the wall. 17. I took a deep breath, repeating the number in my head before the sound of a loud clap echoed off behind me. I jumped slightly on edge. I turned back towards the direction of the arm and saw nothing in its place. Just the mud quickly running down the trail. I swallowed hard and rushed back inside. The number's 17, but I think the arm fell back into the mud. It's not there anymore. Lily's eyes went wide as she relayed that information over to the dispatcher. It wasn't long until she pulled the phone away from her ear and hung up. They told us to stay put, and that this storm's not going to pass anytime soon. They said they've got a ranger on the way, and the police have been informed, but it might take them a while to reach us out here. I bit my lip and looked back outside towards the empty path. I hope it didn't get dragged away by the current. I mumbled. Lily came up right beside me, joining me at the window. I'm sure they'll be able to follow that mud slick down to wherever it goes. On the bright side, that rain cleaned you up a bit. She gave a reassuring smile, and I looked down at myself. My clothes were still riddled with mud, but the rain on my skin seemed to have washed away most of the dirt. I guess that's always a plus, I said stoically. Come on, Max, let's make ourselves at home at least. I'll just lock the door in case, well, you know. Her voice trailed off. In case there's a killer out there? I mumbled at her as she walked over to the door and flipped the lock. She turned around and averted her eyes from my gaze, choosing instead to continue her mission of getting set up. After a few minutes of silence, we had our food laid out in front of us. We had agreed that once the ranger gets here, our little expedition was over. We had seen more than enough in just the past 2 days than we could have in a lifetime. Let's eat and try to get some sleep, I said, chowing down on some extra rations. Lily nodded and joined in on the feast. With full stomachs, we set up for bed. I noticed my friend kept looking out towards the darkened windows. I could feel tension in the air. Everything all right? I asked. Lily shook her head dismissively. I just feel weird, like I'm being watched. I'm sure it's nothing, but just to be safe, she ripped off her pillowcase, then mine, before walking over to the windows and draping them over the glass as makeshift curtains. I just don't want anything looking in at us while we sleep. I don't blame you. I made my way to my bedroll and caseless pillow before lying down, trying to get comfortable. Lily did the same. It was a few hours into the night before I heard Lily's hushed voice. Max, Max, wake up. Do you hear that? I opened my eyes less groggy than I expected and met Lily's gaze. She was staring at the wooden door of the cabin. I spent a few seconds watching the door before I lightly saw the handle of the door jiggle. Someone was trying to get in. What do we do? Lily asked. I was speechless. Maybe it's the dash. Our whispered conversation was interrupted by a loud knocking coming from the other side of the wooden door. Bang, bang, bang. I jumped to my feet. It's got to be the cops. I began my slow, meticulous walk to the door. Who's out there? Silence. Hello? I yelled again. Abruptly, the banging started again, loud enough to drown out my voice. I took a step back from the door and kneeled close to the ground. Each impact on the door rocked the wooden frames of the small cabin. I watched as one of the pillowcase curtains began to slowly slip off the window. No, Lily whispered, tears in her eyes. I rushed over to the window just as the fabric fell and was met face to face with the darkness outside. The banging on the door stopped suddenly. I very carefully kneeled down and grabbed the fabric in my hands to toss back over the window. Thud. Appearing out of the darkness was the palm of a hand. It slapped the window with a heavy force. I could only see the pale palm in the shroud of blackness outside. I quickly threw the pillowcase back on the window and backed up to Lily. She was shivering, her eyes wide with fear. That was the hand, Max. That was the hand that was outside earlier. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I wrapped my arms around Lily for as much my comfort as hers. Thud, 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 thud. The wet palm of the hand kept slapping against the glass. I could hear ripples of cracks spreading along the window pane. I squeezed onto Lily as she balled up and kept my eyes focused on the pillowcase covering the glass, hoping it wouldn't fall and expose that lifeless arm again. With one last thud, it stopped. A light shone through the fabric of the window mere seconds after the attack halted. I could hear the struggling sounds of wheels rolling up towards the cabin. I let out a sigh and a prayer that the Rangers had finally made it. With the sounds of the wheels stopping just a few yards away, I finally heard a voice call out from the void outside. Lily? Max? You in there? The voice sounded familiar. It was the Ranger from the day prior. I slid to my feet, dragging Lily with me. Yeah, we're inside, but someone's out there. I yelled. I rushed over to the door and opened it to see the Ranger standing stiff off in the middle of the small opening in front of the cabin. He was facing us, but the light from his rover coupled with his hat covered his body in intense shadows. His body seemed rigid. Come out of that box and we'll get you home. The Ranger said. His voice seemed different this time, disjointed from his body. I backed up more into the doorway and watched as two impossibly long fingers trailed their way from behind the Ranger's head and made their way across his cheeks to his mouth. They slid inside with little resistance and began pulling his lips outward in a mockingly gruesome smile. Then they kept prying. I watched as his lips strained with the force of the fingers inside of his mouth. His lips became white with the stress placed against them before a shower of red erupted from his mouth, parting the centers of his lips like sliced meat. I'm so perfectly happy. A voice called out from just behind the Ranger, its voice thick and unnatural. I looked for the source and froze. There, right next to the Ranger's feet, was a half-submerged human face dug deeply into the mud. Its black cold eyes shone from some unknown source. Whatever this was a monster of the strictest definition. Its gaze was so vastly separated from humanity that there was no common ground between us. As I locked eyes with this thing, human in shape and deviled in eyes, I saw the Ranger fall into the mud. Just behind his head was a long spider-like arm stretching out of the ground, seemingly changing its size and shape as if it only faintly followed the laws of this reality. The Ranger's body twitched and spasmed on the ground as more and more lifeless hands began to slither out from the mud. wrapping their hands around his body. I was so thirsty, but now I'm so very hungry. The submerged had called out unblinkingly towards me. Without another warning, the ranger's body was ripped under the earth and devoured by the mud. The ground where he was shifted and bubbled over like a small eruption. The creature's eyes stared at me with a deadening gaze. It was observing me. I let out a small chirp from my mouth. Without changing expression, the head effortlessly started gliding through the earth towards the cabin, fingers and arms popping out from the earth around it like fins from a shark. I had stored enough courage to slam the door shut and lock it before running back over to Lily, who saw the whole thing. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head and slumped down next to her. "I don't know." We sat in silence until the sounds of scratching came from below the floorboards. Hundreds of fingers tearing away flesh to the bone, trying to burrow their way upwards. All we could do was sit in the corner furthest away from the windows and pray they didn't get to us. That night we watched as the floors pulsated upwards and downwards as the foundation began to crumble. Those arms were going to drag us and our wooden coffin downwards into the earth. I didn't know what to do. I sat there as the floor cracked open and mud crept up through the seams of the boards like blood flowing from a vein. I sat waiting to die, but Lily had other plans. She grabbed my hand and yanked me up my feet. She stared at the door for a split second before sprinting off with me in tow. She bursted open the door and ran towards the ranger's vehicle. Luckily for us, the ranger never shut it off before the earth took him down. We both hopped on its seat and zipped off the path back from where we came. I hazarded a glance back towards the cabin to see it crumbling into the ground, but there was something else there. Still half submerged on the path mere yards away from us was that unblinking head. Its black eyes shone dead set and emotionless on our escape. We kept driving and driving for God knows how long, until we hit some other rangers who were on a scouting mission up to us and their missing comrade. We told them everything we could, but the looks of disbelief said enough to us. We were labeled as emotionally distressed and unreliable witnesses. The powers that be listed the disappearance of the ranger and the cabin as accidental by case of mudslide. Now, every time it rains, I wonder if somewhere out in the woods a single head peers out on the trails waiting for someone to pass by. A million hands waiting just below the surface to drag them down into the earth. Third story. This story was shared by you/ZachBabyTV. Wendigo's Spirit Long Lost Journal of a Viking Explorer. Last year I was hiking with a buddy of mine in the woods in eastern Newfoundland. For those who don't know, it's in the far eastern part of Canada. We are both originally from the Vancouver and have been avid hikers and campers for many years, traveling to all parts of Canada and currently working on our visas to America actually. While we were on a 2-day hiking trip camping where we saw fit, we stumbled off path as we thought we saw a cave farther off into the distance. After about 3 to 4 minutes of walking off the dirt path into the woods, we approached it, and indeed it was a cave. Knowing that caves are super neat but also very dangerous for many reasons, we just looked around for a bit before deciding if we should check inside if it's clear or not, as it would make a good spot to have camp for the night. Caves are home to many animals ranging small to large, bears, wolves to name a couple of the more dangerous animals to be exact. We eventually grabbed our flashlights from our backpacks and entered the cave entrance cautiously. The cave was pitch black, and once we had walked inside, noticing how deep it actually was. From the outside, it looked like a 6 to 7 foot wide opening with about a 5-foot ceiling. But once you stepped inside, it had a good open space, I'd guess to be about 15 by 15, which was more than enough space for the two of us to set up camp and get a fire going for the night. In the back of the space was what looked like a small pathway of some sort. It was narrow and looked like the earth cracked it just enough for someone to walk through it. Where it led we had no clue, and I wasn't really wanting to find out at that moment. We were tired looking to rest and didn't feel like venturing off into the uncharted cave deeper and risking falling or getting hurt or stuck or God knows what else happens to people in caves. There was a faint water dripping noise down that dark pathway which echoed throughout the cave. Sounded spooky to me, but then again, maybe there's some fresh water nearby we can collect for tomorrow hike, I told my buddy. Once we set up our things, I told him I'd go check it out and see if I could find the source of the water as I held out water containers in my now empty pack and my flashlight in my right hand. The pathway was twisted and narrow, and honestly it was just better that I went alone, plus I doubt my bud would have went with me anyways. He was tired as hell and was just ready to eat and go to sleep. I tucked and squeezed myself through with my pack and eventually found the source of the water after a minute or so walking deeper into the cave system. This cave kept going and going. I could see further ahead, but I found the source thankfully not too far in. There was a small stream that flowed down the rocky surface wall into a small puddle-like area, then disappearing into the rocks and earth. As I shunned my flashlight around, I happened to come across a pouch of some sort which was made of animal fur. I thought it was an animal at first and stood frozen in my tracks. I walked over to the fur ball and grabbed it. I realized the fur was just wrapped around something flat and hard in its center. As I looked, it seemed to have unraveled an old as hell looking leather book of some sort. I was really memorized about the find, but then realized how thirsty I was and took care of filling up our water containers first and bring this book and fur back with me back to our little campsite at the cave entrance. Once I got back, my friend had already gotten the fire going, which felt really nice as I sat down handing him his water. The night was on its way out with the sun starting to set. I told my friend about the book and let him take a look at it. He was always the history buff anyways. I just liked video games and hot chicks. He told me that this journal looked really old and is really surprised it in the shape that it's in. He pointed to the off shapes that were on the cover and on parts of the pages on the inside. They looked like runes he mentioned. I didn't recall what runes were, and he told me that in fact that was the way of communication writing back in the Viking days. As he read, I mumbled to himself, "Dude, this is written in English, which is odd unless this person or Viking traveler was educated or had traveled more than most." He read on for a few minutes and told me to check it out as it mentioned this cave on one of the pages. He handed me the book and he laid back onto his mat and started to relax. I, on the other hand, was totally excited. Not only did I just find some ancient Viking journal in some cave in the middle of nowhere, but it was readable too. "This has to be worth some money," I said to him. He opened his eyes and just replied, "Dude, just read it or go to sleep." I smirked at him, and I laid my back up against the side cave wall and started to read the notes from inside this journal. "If you are finding this journal, that means I am dead. My name is Björn Erling, and the year is 1004 AD. I do not know the exact date of these entries as I have been stuck here in this cave for some time now. Our ship had arrived to the shores of this newfound land several weeks prior to these entries. There was 40 of us in total and have built a small village right off the shore past the wood line. We have an altercation with the natives of this land as they do not speak any language that I have heard before. They attacked our fort on the second week we are here. Several of our members have died and most of theirs too in the process. We can't seem to communicate properly with them, and they keep attacking in the middle of the night, and we are trying our best to lessen our defenses. We have built walls around our village, but they always seem to find a way inside, picking us off one by one. They're not big people, quite small in fact, but there are many, and our next ship isn't due here for another week or more. I was out hunting with a brother of mine in these woods. We went deeper than we have been as our people are hungry and we needed meat. The sun was dim and the colors above were quite pleasant to see when it was visible from all the trees overhead. We started hearing noises echoing around us in the woods. Not knowing what they were, we followed them. No sense at turning back. These sounds would have already startled off any catch we may have been tracking. As we continued deeper and deeper into the woods, the noises and snapping sounds became louder. We had no idea what was in store for us at the time, but we had to investigate. During our proust died, that when we both heard a familiar-sounding voice speaking to us. It sounded like one of our other Viking brothers back at the village that had gone missing during one of the attacks for the natives. Bjorn, help me. They have me trapped here, and I cannot escape. My brother screamed, by Odin, where are you? Silence. The voices didn't reply. I gripped my sword handle on my waist, and my brother held his bow with a firm grip. Do you think that was really Kinjo? I don't know, I replied, but we need to find out either way. It def sounded like him. We heard our brother speak again, but this time it spoke to use twice, but from different directions in front of us. Levi, why did you not help me in the village? Hurry, I don't have much time. My brother Levi ran off to the left and motioned with his arm, pointing for me to follow the other sound to the front right from our location. I nodded and readied my sword. After we had split up, I started to have a feeling of dread. An airy feeling was washing over me. This felt off. None of this seemed right. The natives didn't speak our language, and that voice did sound like our brother Nook, but it was off in a way too. Not soon after, that's when I heard the screaming. The screaming of Levi. Rushing back in the direction I saw him walk to, I hurried as fast as I could, no longer caring about keeping the silence as I ran and screamed out to him, trying to find his whereabouts. Further in the distance is when I saw it. I cannot even call it a man. It was some kind of forest creature. It was skinny like it was starting and shaped like a man from what I could muster. Its long arms clawed my friend, dragging his now lifeless body further into the dark woods. This creature had antlers on its head like some kind of deer. We have gods like this back home. Had they followed us here to this new land and now punishing us for becoming Christians? I was in total shock, but there was no choice in the matter, and I was losing sight of them in the dark now, and there was a good distance still between us. I ran as fast as I could, but even in doing so still couldn't keep up with this creature dragging Levi. I picked up his bow off the grass along the chai and ended up finding this cave on this hillside. I just knew that creature had taken my brother into that cave. There was nowhere else in eyesight where it could have gone and disappeared to. Once in the cave, I explored as much as I could after making a makeshift torch with some fabric from my clothing on a nearby stick I had found. The space was tight. I found the bloody drag marks right away, so my hunch was correct. Levi was brought somewhere inside this cave system. I had gotten lost a couple of times within this cave. It is more than meets the eye, but always seem to find my way back to the water source as the constant dripping which echoes the labyrinth halls leads me back to here. I cannot leave him. I cannot leave my brother. I must avenge him and place his bow in his hand so that the Valkyries may take his soul to heaven or Valhalla to meet his family in paradise forevermore. Am writing this all down with the best of my knowledge in case I do not make it back out of this cave from which I ventured. Someone must know what happened to us. Someone must be led aware of this creature out in the woods. I hear my brother calling me now, far off, echoing off somewhere in this cave. I must end this log for now. If I return, I will update what I find. Goodbye for now. That was the last thing written in this journal. The rest of the pages were blank. Dude, wake up. I have to tell you something. Fourth story. This story was shared by you / Baked Bean Chip Dip. Something is seriously wrong. Help me. This may seem so fake, but please somebody hear me out and help me. What is going on? My name is Marcy. I'm a 17-year-old gender-fluid individual. Pronouns she / they / it. I live in the upper Midwestern part of America. I am being hunted by something, but I don't know. What? Weird things have started from a very young age, but the last few years have been the weirdest. I should start with the walker that hunted my neighborhood. I was in my room with the window open and I heard this sound. It almost sounded like a sobbing baby. I ran downstairs and said, "What the hell was that?" And my brother, 11M, and mom, 49F, were standing in the kitchen with the back door open. I started laughing at them and said that they scared me, but they looked at me with the same look I had when I had heard the sound. They were saying they didn't make any noise and that they heard it too. I did not believe them and told them that they got me and that. The joke was over. I did not find it funny. I suffer with awful mental health issues like psychosis and BPD, so hallucinations happen quite often. They know about my mental health, so it struck me as odd for them to play that kind of joke on me. When they continued to look scared, I realized they weren't joking. They started to tell me they heard a noise that sounded like something trying to mimic the sound of a grunting man. I told them I heard the sound of a crying baby. I sent my brother to his room so he wouldn't be freaked out. Me and my mom stepped outside to see if we could hear anything else. She pointed out that my dog was terrified. I could see my dog, trembling and staring across the yard. After a bit, all the dogs in the neighborhood started barking, including my dog. After about 5 minutes of barking, they all stopped abruptly. My mom and I were super weirded out. Then we heard another dog start barking. The weird thing is that it didn't sound like a dog, but something trying to mimic the sound of a dog. It sounded like it was coming from our yard, but the only dog that was there was my dog, Lucy. She shook and ran inside. The barking was slow and extremely unnerving. I heard a neighbor shout, "Shut the fuck up." So obviously he heard it too. The barking sounded closer, so we went inside and closed the door. We went around and locked every door and window. That happened almost a year ago. Now I have been struggling immensely with mental health issues, and on the 1st of this year, I tried to take my own life. I was super close to succeeding until the cops found me. It's just gotten worse. 2 days ago, a mark appeared on my collarbone. It looks like a semicircle with a tiny circle under it. It burned and then suddenly appeared. Yesterday during school, I opened my laptop to do some schoolwork and it started to freeze. Then the screen went black. When it turned back on, everything was red and there was an awfully terrible face in the middle. I freaked out and shut the laptop, pushing it away from me. My partner asked if I was okay, and I asked if they saw it too. They said they weren't looking and asked what I saw. I didn't want to seem crazy by telling them. My luck has been awful and I keep hearing the whistling noise. Today I went face first into the ice. I'm all swollen and cut up. I noticed today another mark, identical to the first mark on my neck now. The first mark looks like it's gotten more prominent and it hurts more. It looks like a significant design and I'm looking for answers. I feel like I'm going insane and I'm getting very little sleep. Please somebody help me. 5th story. This story was shared by you/Don Keeksotrozy. What lurks in the forest beyond the tree lines? How do I explain this? If I tell you, will you please believe me? I hope you will. Call me crazy, call me sane, call me a believer, call me an attention seeker. Call me whatever you please. It is only due to other experiences that I have had the courage to post this in the no sleep community. But I beg of you to listen to what I tell you. Because they're real, they very real, as real as my shaking hands as I write this. The things, the creatures that inhabit the forest at night. It all started when I decided to go to a survival camp that would last 10 days. We met at a campground with a group of 5 other survivalists and a group leader and his assistant. They would stay with us for 3 days and show us techniques, things like set up a tent, how to identify local flora that was edible, and how to set traps, etc. Each of us were given a backpack with items that you would commonly carry while on a hike, like chapstick, binoculars, some protein bars, a lighter, and matches. We were allowed to bring one personal item, and my choice was a hatchet. For 3 days, our group did several things. We used the river to get water, which we liked boil for 15 minutes to kill anything in the water. There are a few natural springs in the area that you can drink fresh, and the guide showed us these. We learned how to make lean-to, how to use rock walls to make shelter with fire heating it up to keep warm, how to build hammocks out of kudzu vines, what wild strawberries look like along with several other things. They did not show us mushrooms as these are easily misidentified, so they don't chance that for legal reason, but the puffball ones are the only ones they allowed us to pick as they're easily identifiable. We also made traps like snares and rock falls, along with making fishing line out of kudzu vines and makeshift hooks, or finding fish in quiet zones of the creek where you could trap trout. We learned how to make fire with binocular glass, matches and lighter, and proper TP builds for you kindling. After the 3 days we were let go on our own. You would stay at base camp, and the leader would walk you several miles into the undergrowth. Each of us were taken at different times and given a satellite radio in case we had an emergency. So we set off on our own and made the best of it. The group leaders would stay at base and wait 5 days, then come get you. Day 1. Nothing out of the ordinary. I set a few traps, built a decent lean-to on the side of a large boulder. Fire is doing a solid job of heating the rock wall to keep it pretty warm inside. The air was crisp, not quite cold. Some drizzle, but no deluges. I'm close enough to the river that I only need to walk 70 yards or so. I'm not quite up the mountains, but on somewhat of a hill, surrounded by pawpaw, rhododendrons that are starting to bloom, catalpa, and several conifers. I ate half of a protein bar and collected quite a few plants. First night is quiet, only hear a few things out in the forest. It's very dark outside the firelight. I've collected enough wood to keep any critters at bay, namely black bears, as they can be curious. I was awoken at some point in the night by the sat phone. Another survivalist is complaining about some large animal walking around his campground. Seems to believe it's a bear, but it sounds like it's walking on 2 legs. Never says anything else the rest of the night. Night goes by without incident. But I will say earlier I did find tracks that looked human, but were indicative of a Bigfoot, as the footprint wasn't formed quite like ours. I wear a size 12 boot. This I put my foot into the print, and it was a solid 5-inch longer. Now there are stories of wild men in this part of the country. I brushed the stories off until I saw that print, and from night 1 sat call. Night 3 is when everything went to shit. Around 1 a.m. is when I started questioning things when a large rock hit the back of my lean-to. I figured it was from the boulder, and something simply broke off, as rock slides are common around here. After that woke me up, I grabbed the flashlight and assessed the damage. I rolled the boulder off the shelter, and it wasn't too far from breaking it completely. I half-fist fixed it and figured I'd just fix it in the morning. I had caught a rabbit in a snare, and I cleaned it not far from camp. I'd say 100 yards off. That was when I heard a rattling sound similar to that of a rattlesnake. I shined the light that way, and that was when I saw it. It had black fur and nightmarish red eyes, giving it the look and style of a predatory black panther. It had a dark, feral appearance. It had the body of a massive tiger with a tail with scales at the end that shook to produce rattling sounds similar to that of a rattlesnake. Its eyes glue a bright red and leaving trails of reddish lines as it moved through the trees watching me. It moved towards me carefully and cautiously just when I thought I was done for something screamed. It sounded like a gorilla when it gets angry, followed by a chuffing sound, like when a dog has drank too much water. That deep in the throat, like it's clearing it out. I turned back where I flashed my light, and the creature was gone. I stood there frozen in this tiny clearing, thinking a bear is finishing off the entrails of the rabbit I cleaned earlier. I have no weapons other than my hatchet and a pocket knife. I come out of my trance and walk over to my backpack, never taking my eyes off the wood line. Everything in the night is quiet. I only hear the river running and the logs crackling. I sit down with my hatchet and throw more logs on the fire, hoping that it gets large and hit enough to keep things at bay. I sit for maybe 30 minutes, and I'm kind of dozing off. Then another rock comes hurling from the left side of the forest and falls 10 yards away. I know the boulder didn't do this based on where this rock came from. Now I'm panicking. I stand up hoping to make myself look large with my shadow on the boulder behind me. I hear the chuffing again, and smaller trees further in are clearly moving back and forth rather quickly. I can see a large black shape moving around the firelight just at the edge of the end of the light. 40 yards and maybe. I can hear this thing breaking limbs, crushing leaves with every step. Thing was at least 8 foot tall if I had to guess. It had long black hair and terrifying sharp teeth, but it was pretty far away from where I was. It's slowly moving away, but I could tell where the thing's head was watching me, as every now and again I'd see a shine. It flashed its teeth like a baboon by folding its lips back, and then walked away further into the woods, and the sound started getting fainter and fainter. And I could hear it go into the river and cross it. That loud shush sound from the water as it crossed were only a few steps. It was about 20 feet across the river at this point. I sat back down and contemplated what to do. It's around 2 a.m., and I have a few hours till daylight. I don't want to walk the 4 miles back in the dark in a place I'm not familiar with. Fast forward 2 hours, it's 4-ish a.m. The sat phone turns on, and a guy is screaming into it. Something is trying to kill me. I've had several ricks thrown at me. A large man is outside my shelter. I can hear it. This isn't a bear. I don't know what it is, but I need help. Silence. 15 minutes, 20 minutes go by. Another guy comes on. Something did that to me last night, but I thought it was a bear. I stayed here thinking I knew what it was. Rocks weren't thrown though, but I could hear it walking the perimeter of my camp. It's close to 5 a.m. now. If I can make it a few hours until daylight, I'm fine. All the forest sounds have returned. I'm still waiting. Around 7:15 a.m. and check my backpack to see if I could find my radio, and it's gone. I start to panic because sun isn't quite up yet, but that eerie dawn light is filling the land and the clearing is still pretty dark. I start gathering my things and start putting the fire out with dirt around the pit, and start to walk. Figure I have no choice at this point. As I'm walking, I hear something mimicking my footsteps. I stopped, and just before I put my foot down, I heard a leaves crumble behind me. I ran as fast as I could deeper into the woods, losing my sense of direction. About 10 minutes into running, I see a cabin. I run in, and I slam the door behind me, placing everything I could in front of it. I'm writing this now, but out of my window, I can see it showing its teeth to me like a baboon trying to intimidate another animal, its glowing eyes just watching me. It's slowing, walking around to the front door, running its massive hands against the outside of the cabin. It's beating the door down. I don't have much time left. Please, if you go into the forest, whether it be for a camping trip or hiking, beware of what lurks beyond the tree line. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel, Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.